panelist, Betty Chafin Rash. Betty received her Bachelor of Arts at Greensboro College and a Master of Public Administration from UNC Chapel Hill. She's been a consultant on local and state government issues and served as the Associate Dean of Students at UNC Charlotte from 1975 to 1979. She's also served as the Director of the Women's Leadership and Lecturer at Queens College, and is the owner and principal of Betty Chafin Rash Public Affairs and Consultants, 1983 to 1997. Perhaps closest to my heart, Betty also served as one of the founding members of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Women's Summit. I introduce you, Betty Chafin Rash.
I'm sorry that the mayor has left because I think we're so lucky to have a mayor who gets it, right? When I was asked to take on this task, I had two thoughts. One, that I was probably considered the oldest, I won't say rat, but the oldest horse in the barn. And two, that this was really, really daunting. How do you tell the story of the women's movement in Mecklenburg County in 5 minutes? I have permission to go a little bit over that. And I'm also intimidated by the fact that as I look around this room, there are so many women here who've been part of the history of the women's movement, who played major roles in the history, and I won't name them by name. Let me take you back to 1972. There were no women then on the county commission. There were no women on the Charlotte City Council. Ruth Easterling was later appointed that year. There were no women in the Mecklenburg delegation to the North Carolina legislature, and certainly no women from North Carolina in the U.S. Congress. There were a handful of women attorneys, I think about 6. It's interesting to note that one of them, Sarah Parker, who is now Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. There were few female physicians. One who many of you know, who recently passed away, was Johnny McLeod, who just did so many things for this community. And there were only 1 or 2 women in, I wouldn't say top management, but in senior management at our major corporations. And there were no women then, and there have been very few since, chairing major civic boards. And things began to change with the formation of the Charlotte's Women's Political Caucus in 1972. And I have to point out that the Charlotte chapter of NOW had already been formed, so they were a little bit ahead of us. Caucus was inspired by women like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. Many of you heard Gloria Steinem when she came to UNC Charlotte. And it was formed with the express purpose of electing women to political office, getting women appointed to major boards and commissions, and the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And you've already heard from Lisa that never happened. We recruited in that year Liz Hare to run for county commission, and she became the first woman to serve on the commission and later chaired it. 3 women were elected to the North Carolina legislature, and in 1973, Pat Locke was elected to city council, and I ran and was elected in 75. Ruth Easterling was elected to the North Carolina legislature in 74 and went on to serve, as many of you know, 13 terms, and became one of the most powerful women in the legislature. It was truly an exhilarating time. We were feeling our power. We were endorsing candidates, we raised money for them, and we volunteered tirelessly. A number of you women out there worked with me on Liz's campaign, and some worked for me. Once I was elected to council, and Liz and others, we got more women appointed to major boards. One woman appointed to the Airport Authority, one to the Coliseum Auditorium Civic Center Authority, and one to the Planning Commission, all first. No women had ever served on those boards. On the County Commission side, Liz was leading the effort for the establishment of the Women's Commission, and I want to tell a little story about that. And she was also getting women appointed to major boards such as the Hospital Authority. My little story about the Women's Commission, a number of us representing all of the women's organizations in Charlotte went to the County Commission and recommended the establishment of an organization such as the Women's Commission, who would not only study the status of women in Mecklenburg County, but work on some of the major issues facing women. Nancy Klein, who's here tonight, became the first chair. What I vividly remember, there's Nancy, what I vividly remember was that when we made that presentation, one of the commissioners, one of the male commissioners, who will not name by name, he's now deceased, said, well, if we're going to have a women's commission, I think we ought to have a men's commission. Ridiculous. In 1977, and we'll try to hurry this as much as possible, with the passage of district representation, more women were elected to the council. 2 more, in fact, and I became the first female mayor pro tem. Later, Sue Myrick was elected mayor and eventually to Congress. We were on a roll, and here's another funny story. At one point in the mid-'80s, the majority of the city council members was female. I bet many of you didn't know that. Some leaders of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce referred to them, and this was in the Charlotte Observer, as those housewives. Yes. Not especially flattering. Women continued to run for and be elected to political office. It was no longer considered unusual. Women were appointed to more boards as we implemented, the caucus, a talent bank, so that when vacancies occurred, we had qualified candidates ready to serve, and we lobbied for their appointments. And I encourage a number of women's organizations here to kind of reinvent the talent bank. More women were entering the professions and were beginning to climb the corporate ladder. Title IX was passed, opening the door for women to participate in sports at a collegiate and professional level. Women were making groundbreaking strides in the media and becoming anchors locally and nationally. More and more women were starting their own businesses. Chia-Li's going to talk more about that, though loans were still hard to come by. The Women's Commission was focusing on programs for victims of domestic violence, displaced homemakers, job training, all designed to improve the status of women in our community. At that point, it was highly regarded. Appointments were competitively sought. Even men wanted to serve on the Women's Commission. In the early 80s, a number of women's organizations came together for the first Women's Summit at Queens College, and we packed the auditorium there. We wanted to develop an agenda, and that agenda resulted in, and Teresa knows this, in the blueprint for the 80s, and was kind of under the umbrella of the Women's Commission. It included an inventory of women's organizations and services and resources that they could provide. We were also successful in breaking the barriers for admission to private clubs, such as the City Club and Athletic Club. Prior to that, women couldn't join. In the 80s as well, both women business owners, WBO, and women executives were established in recognition of the increasing number of women active and leading positions in corporations and starting their own businesses. The 90s saw dramatic changes, especially in the number of women entering the professions and in business. Women were entering med school and law schools in record numbers and settling in Charlotte, and we have several examples of that. Judge Yvonne Mims. Women were asked to serve on private boards, finally. Yeah. Some of the chamber and the banks, but even now, only 2 women have ever chaired the chamber. A woman became president of Central Piedmont, Ruth Shaw, and then she later became president of Duke Power. A woman was elected to chair the United Way Board. I think there have only been 3. Women continue to run for and be elected to political office, including the state senate. In fact, we've had 2, the last being Leslie Winter. Today there are over, and I hope my statistics are correct, there are over 500 women attorneys in Charlotte, many of whom are now senior partners. Am I close, Yvonne? And over 450 female physicians, which really surprised me. And a number of female physicians have in fact chaired the Medical Society. Most major corporations now, including Johnny McLeod, most major corporations now have women serving in top management. Still, though, there are no chief executive officers of any of our corporations. But as all of us know, things aren't necessarily going well. The wage gap still exists. Lisa told you about that. Yes, white women earn approximately 3/4 of what men earn in Charlotte, but for African American women it's 64.9%, and for Hispanic women 52.1%. The unemployment rate, which is so high in our community, is hitting women disproportionately. Domestic violence is on the upswing. We have women here tonight who are working very hard on that issue. Single moms are struggling, and there is an inadequate supply of affordable housing. But to me, and I hope you'll talk about this tonight, one of the most alarming trends is that fewer women are running for political office. I don't really understand that. I don't know if the younger women understand how important this is. I wonder where our future political leaders, female political leaders, are going to come from. I mentioned all of the other major issues facing women today, and I have to include the horrific anti-abortion law just passed by our North Carolina legislature, and sadly introduced by a woman. And I just heard Anthony say appointments to boards up until he became mayor, 90% men. We have a lot of problems, ladies. So I hope that you will ask questions in our Q&A, because I've only touched on the very surface of the history of women in Mecklenburg County.
Thank you so very much for laying the foundation for tonight. Good evening, everyone.